Hi there, home coffee enthusiasts. I'm here to show you today how to make much better coffee with a Jene Cafe roaster, step by step. So you might think if you want to roast coffee at home, you just need to put it into one of these machines, press the go button, wait a few minutes and you'll have some roasted coffee at the end. But there's so much more to it than this. Two different roasts of even the same bean can have radically different flavors depending on the skill and care of the roaster. Green coffee beans are mostly grown by farmers in developing countries along what's called the coffee belt. So by the time it gets to you, you want to use your roasting skills to pick out the flavors that those farmers have been cultivating and nurturing in those coffee plants. We don't want to waste any of that coffee that those farmers have worked so hard to bring to us. So I'm going to show you how to get the best possible roast out of a Jene Cafe roaster. Step number one. The selection of beans that you use is very important and will define how you choose to roast those beans. So today I'm going to show you how to roast two different kinds of beans. I've got an Ethiopian and a Brazilian. And the Ethiopian I'm going to do a lighter roast for because I think the flavors that come out of an Ethiopian coffee are much more interesting in something like a drip or a mocha pot or even a French press. The Brazilian coffee I'm going to roast to a little bit of a darker profile because I actually prefer some of those caramelly and chocolatey flavors for an espresso. Now you may have seen some of your local cafes using lighter roast coffee for an espresso, but personally I prefer a slightly darker city or full city roast even for an espresso. But this is the beauty of having your own coffee roaster. It means that you can roast to the profile that you like the most. So if you like light roast coffee for espresso, go for it. If you like dark roast coffee for a pour over, go for it. It's completely up to you. The roasting process with a Jene Cafe roaster goes through several phases. Stage 1 is called the yellowing phase, and this is where the coffee beans go from a green color to more of a yellow straw-like color. As the moisture is evaporated from within the beans, you get to a certain point where the beans look very yellow, and that's when you enter the browning phase. As I discussed in a previous video on how coffee is roasted at the Sidewalk Coffee Roastery in Cambridge, the browning phase is when you have a lot of control over what flavors come out of the coffee. If you roast through the browning phase very quickly, you end up with more acidity in the final coffee because you don't give enough time to develop and caramelize those chocolatey, caramelly, or nutty flavors. The signal for the end of the browning phase is the first crack, when you start to hear the coffee beans cracking within the machine. One of the difficulties in using the Jene Cafe roaster is that sometimes it can be hard to hear the first crack because of the whirring of the motors and the rotation of the drum. You can get by this by listening closely and paying attention to your roast rather than just leaving it going and going off to do something else. After first crack, this is where I like to roast my coffee too, and this might be called a medium roast and starting to go into a city roast. As you progress through from medium to city roast and then to full city roast, you'll start to see more of those oils develop on the surface of the bean. Personally, I always stop my coffee roasting by about the full city roast stage. After this point, the coffee just starts to look a little bit like charcoal and it doesn't have that many interesting flavors anymore. So you turn on the machine with the blue button, and the first variable you'll control is the temperature, and that's controlled by rolling the red dial. The temperature goes up to 250 degrees C, but the measuring of this temperature is a little bit off, and sometimes I think that it's a lot lower temperature than it's recording. The second variable you can control is the amount of time it roasts. The default is about 15 minutes. Now I don't recommend going as long as 15 minutes for most roasting profiles because this will usually lead to a dark or over roasted coffee profile. Now the third variable is the weight of the coffee going into the machine. So for this Brazilian coffee, I'm going to go with 175 grams. Now another piece of gear that you'll want to pick up is one of these. No, it's not a slinky, it's an exhaust tube. The exhaust tube goes on top of here and it's really useful to get the smoke out of your apartment or out of your house rather than having it drift out into your kitchen. So I bought my Jene Cafe roaster here in Japan for about 70,000 yen, which is about 550 pounds. I'll put a link in the description below, but believe me, this actually pays for itself within a year. Buying green coffee beans is much cheaper than buying already roasted beans. So if you want to learn a new skill and you want to get coffee for cheaper in the long term, then you should get one of these machines because it's really worth it in my opinion. Alright, let's start and make some coffee. I'm going to move my Jene Cafe roaster into my kitchen. First thing I'm going to do is put my exhaust tube on top of the exhaust here and thread it out the window. Now since I've discovered this, I've been doing it every time. So what I do is I turn on the coffee machine with nothing inside, go to 210 degrees C, and start preheating. After 3 or 4 minutes, the temperature will reach 210 degrees, and that's when I'm actually going to pull the plug out once the handle is facing a direction where I can pull out the drum. Now I'm going to set the temperature to 235 and start at the default time. It's about 6 minutes into this roast and we're starting the browning phase, so I'm going to lower the temperature down to 220 because I want to develop and caramelize those flavors in this Brazilian coffee bean. You want to make sure that the temperature doesn't drop too low. You don't want to stall the roast, so I'm going to put this back up to 230 at about this stage. So the reason why I start off with the default time of 15 minutes is that it allows me to adjust towards the end of the roast based on what I'm seeing. So right now, this coffee doesn't look like it's roasted for as long as I want it to, so I'm going to add 1 minute to the timer. After you roast every coffee, you should check for under-roasted or over-roasted beans that would affect the final flavour of the coffee in the cup. Now, don't go trying to drink this coffee straight away. You need to let the coffee beans degas a little bit to get rid of some of that smoky CO2 flavour that comes from the roasting process. I keep my coffee in an airtight container like this for 3 or 4 days before I try to use it. I also recommend that you don't overwork your Jene Cafe machine. Don't use it back to back for making lots and lots of coffee because you will damage the motor or the plastic parts within, and some of them can even melt at the high temperatures if sustained for too long. I'm going to leave my Jene Cafe machine to cool down, and I'm going to come back this evening and roast the Ethiopian coffee. And that's it. I hope this video is helpful if you either have a Jene Cafe roaster machine or if you're thinking of picking one up. If you have one already and you do things differently, please tell me in the comments, as I'd like to make a follow-up video on techniques for using this machine in the future. So I'm going to show you how to get the best out of your green coffee beans so you can make a better coffee and not waste stuff.